Welcome to Transit Unplugged. I'm your host, Paul Comfort, and this is our special Monday edition of Comfort's Corner, where we take an inside look at what's happening in and around the transit industry as we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. This is Monday, April 20th and 21st show, and today we've got a special show for you. Last week, I held a CEO Roundtable, a virtual live one online, where we had close to 100 people online listening, and we had some of the top CEOs in the country with us virtually on camera to talk about the pandemic and the response and how we get out of it. Our guests were Inez Evans, CEO of IndyGo in Indianapolis, Scott Bogren, CEO and Executive Director of the Community Transportation Association of America, which represents mid-size and smaller transit systems, Wade Coombs, who is head of transportation at Strathcona County in Canada, Bill Carpenter, the CEO of the Rochester, New York area transit system called RTS, Timm, the CEO of GRTC in Richmond, Virginia, and Quinn, the CEO of the Maryland Transit Administration. We spent 90 minutes with them talking through what they've been doing now and what we hope to do. We had some great insights. Bill Carpenter has a great kind of list of what are being considered best practices for the industry. And it's all for you today free here on Transit Unplugged. We hope you enjoy it as a reference point as you navigate your way through this coronavirus pandemic and hopefully are finding your way out the other side with a game plan to return our ridership to whatever the new normal is going to be and remain a safe, efficient, reliable provider with world-class customer service of public transportation for the essential workers and beyond as we move forward. Thanks for being with us today. Stay safe out there and enjoy this special 90-minute episode. Great to be with you today on our CEO Roundtable. We have about 150 people gathered with 6 of America's top CEOs talking transit and COVID-19, this pandemic which has really given the public transit industry a gut punch. And so we're going to be talking about the response, how it's impacted these CEOs, transit systems, and what is our game plan to get back up to whatever our new normal is. So first off, I want to introduce our guests all at one time, and then I'll ask them to kind of talk a little bit about their system for a few minutes, and then we're going to get into the actual impact and some of the strategies that each of them have put in place. First off is Inez Evans, who is CEO of IndyGo in Indianapolis, big transit system there. An older friend of mine. We've been friends for many years, worked around the industry together, and so happy to have her on board. She is one of our bright new female CEOs of transit systems. I said 2019 was the year of the woman when it comes to CEOs. Julie got her job then too. A lot of transit CEOs were women. I think they were tired of us old men and try to get some fresh blood and new thinking in there, which is great. And so we're happy to have both Inez and Timm on board. Julie is the CEO of GRTC in Richmond and become a good friend of mine, and she's got a lot of great ideas as well. She came from Nashville with our friend Steve down there, and she is making a mark for herself in the state of Virginia. I've heard so many good things about her from my colleagues. Scott Bogren, who is Executive Director of the Community Transportation Association of America, CTAA, I'm very honored to have him with us today. He is one of the longtime industry veterans. We've known each other for, I think, 30 years since I first got into the business. He was working there as editor of the magazine at CTAA and now represents all the mid-sized systems and smaller transit systems across America. And then Wade Coombs is here from Canada. He is CEO of Strathcona County and become a good friend. We share a lot of the same worldview and so happy to have him with us. Bill Carpenter, the first guest on my Transit Unplugged podcast, who I was able to go visit him and then the next day go see the U2 concert in Buffalo. So it's always has pleasant memories in my mind about my visit to see Bill. And Bill has some amazing best practices that I've actually posted on my LinkedIn page. If you want to see, he actually wrote them up for me. It's very thank you. He did that. He has like 10 or 15 kind of to-do things that they've done there in Rochester, New York. At his transit system, RTS, and just amazing. And then I saved the best for last, my buddy Kevin Quinn, who Kevin was the architect of Baltimore Link. Sorry, you all are great, but the guy I worked with personally for 2.5 years there at MTA, and So happy that he is the new CEO of MTA in Baltimore. He designed the whole Baltimore Link project. Who better to take over when I left? And he's got a big operation running 6 different modes of transportation. We'll be talking about some of that in a few minutes. So thank you all so much for being here. We'll give you a virtual clap. Everybody online. All right. So let's start with you, Kevin. Why don't we start with you? We'll do it in backwards order. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself for just a minute and, your transit system and just kind of a scope of what you do.
Sure. So my name's Kevin Quinn. I'm the CEO of Maryland Transit Administration, as Paul noted. I've been in that role for nearly 3 years now. MTA is the 12th largest transit agency in America with 6 modes. And key to know is that in the Baltimore region, we've got bus, light rail, metro, and a pretty sizable paratransit service. And also statewide, we have MARC commuter rail as well as commuter bus service. And statewide, we do about 100 million rides per year. And it's a pretty sizable operation. This coronavirus, this crisis has hit us hard, and we're doing our best to support the city and Baltimore region.
Thank you, Kevin. Julie Timm from Richmond.
Well, sure. GRTC, I've been here for 6 months. Welcome to GRTC. And we are probably a smaller mid-sized agency. We run about an operational budget around $55 million a year, 150 buses, 100 vans, 45 routes, between about 500 employees with another 100 in the paratransit system. We're probably one of the few systems across the country, I think, that was seeing double-digit increases in ridership since 2018, right up until about March. Obviously, then we started seeing some massive drops. And a lot of that was due to the implementation of the BRT, the Pulse, in June of 2018, along with a massive system redesign where we went from having very moderate to low frequency service to having our core network having 10 to 15 minute frequency and service, and corresponding with that was that high ridership. So a very exciting place to be and a very great system.
That's awesome. Thank you. And Bill Carpenter, Rochester.
Hey, Paul, and great being here. We've got a system, 900 employees, 420 buses. We serve 16 million customers. Our core area, geographic area, the city of Rochester and Monroe County, the county seat of Monroe County is Rochester. And so that's a 40-foot bus service people are familiar with, a robust paratransit service. But then we serve 7 regional counties as well. So we've got the urban core ridership issue around COVID-19, as well as counties with as few as 35,000 population, serving 30 to 40 people a day at this point during COVID-19, and making sure the essential trips are still being taken care of safely for customers and employees.
Excellent. Thank you. Wade from Strathcona County in Canada.
Oh, thanks, Paul. And I feel like the little brother on this group because we're the small system. We're in Edmonton, just outside Edmonton, Alberta, which is, you want to have a rough idea, go to Vegas and just head north and you'll find us. We are a specialized municipality, so we have an urban footprint called Sherwood Park, which is the largest hamlet out of about 70,000 people. And then we have a rural area of about 30,000 people. We cover a footprint of about 1,200 square kilometers, which is about 460 square miles that we provide service to. Our predominant service is commuter service into Edmonton. We go into the downtown core, into the University of Alberta. We also have the local service for conventional. We do the local and commuter. On our specialized transit, we provide service obviously in the local and into Edmonton, and we also provide it into the rural area. We cover that large geographical zone. We have a system, 76 buses. 24 of those are double-decker, which we use on our commuter service. And then we have 13 specialized transit buses.
Awesome. Thank you. Inez Evans from IndyGo, Indianapolis.
Hi, everybody. Inez Evans, CEO of IndyGo. I've been here since October of 2019. So what is that? 7 months, 8 months? I don't know. I'm losing track. With COVID, we don't know what day it is anymore.
That's true.
So I run the largest system here in the state of Indiana. We have about 875 employees to date, about 208 buses. Our ridership is about 9.2 million a year, and our budget sits anywhere between 111 to 116 million. We have 31 routes, including the Red Line that we started in September. Also, yeah, I got here in August. How did I forget that? It was my son's birthday. Hello. So we started the Red Line in September 1st, matter of fact, is when we started that. And I guess we'll go into more specifics about ridership and things of that nature. We were working on our expanded Marion County Transit Plan before all this craziness started. So we were about to implement our network redesign in June, and now that's been delayed. So that's our biggest thing right now.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Inez. And you'll notice that we have a representative from a really large system with Kevin, and then some mid-sized systems. Wade is kind of, I'd say it's still a mid-sized system. Scott Bogren represents all the mid-sized systems and even some of the real smaller ones, like the one I used to run in Queen Anne's County, which had 15 buses when I first got started. So Scott, tell us about your association and what you all do.
And first, Paul, thanks for the invite. And it's great to kind of share a virtual stage with such an accomplished group of people in the transit field. So appreciate the invite. Yes, CTAA, we have about 1,400 members around the country. Our members are smaller cities, rural communities, non-emergency medical transportation providers, veterans transportation services. We have a number of tribal transit members. So we tend to focus in that kind of sector. And our work, some of which I'll talk about, has really been focused originally right as the outbreak kind of in the pandemic occurred, in working with Congress to secure funding so that we could continue to pay employees across the country and ideally be repaid for all the losses that were occurring. And it's really now changing into a look at safety. And with that part of the work done, how do we keep our workforce safe? How do we contribute to the stay-at-home orders and what's essential and all those kinds of issues?
That's good. Thanks, Scott. And how long have you been working there at CTAA?
31 years, Paul.
Now, the reason I say that is he doesn't look much older than 31. So that's what I always say. He's found the fountain of youth somehow. He hasn't changed. I've known this guy for 30 years, and he looks maybe 5 years older than when I met him.
I need you around more often, Paul. You're very good for my ego.
And he's also stayed skinny, unlike me. We were both skinny guys at one time, and something happened. I don't know. He kept it. But so anyway, thanks so much. That's a good look at kind of the across the spectrum we've got of all of North America, and different systems are being involved. So Bill, I want to go with you since you're on the main screen right now anyway. And could you tell us, I'd like to just kick it off, if you don't mind, tell us some of what's been happening in your system for a minute or two, and then some of these great best practices that you've implemented.
Yeah, and I think for all of us, I keep trying to remind my staff, if you go back to March 1st, our state budget is April 1. So we were busy working with our folks in the state capitol in Albany on trying to maximize revenue. And I remember March 9th and 10th, we were in Albany for our advocacy day. Do you shake hands? Do you tap boots? Do you bump elbows? What do you do? And on my way home from Albany, got word that the APTA Legislative Conference had been canceled, and thinking, boy, are they being overly cautious or what? And by Saturday, we had stopped collecting fares on our smaller buses, our paratransit service. And by the following Friday, we were doing rear boarding and had waived fares, so customers didn't have to touch the fare box, and we could keep the bus operators secure. So this has been a very sudden change. The guiding principles that I've used with my executive team and leadership team is, when this is over, we want to be able to say no one died on our watch because of something we could have done differently. So we've been providing people with hand sanitizer. I had to beg, borrow, and steal initially, where all the store hand sanitizer was gone. Worked with all my connections to get hand sanitizer. So bus operators had that in their hands. I'm not sure where we're getting some of our masks from at this point. I feel a little bit like calling 2 or 3 of our procurement people radar from the old MASH show of, I thought these weren't available to anyone, and why do we have some? And we didn't have enough for every operator initially. So how do you make those decisions? But what we could do immediately was clean more frequently. We could add cleaning during the day when the buses were at our beautiful award-winning transit center. We would provide the best personal protection equipment we could, whatever that meant. And for contamination, as an example, those are the folks that got the best masks. If we had any gowns, those are the ones that got the gowns. We developed leave policies so that if you're over 70, underlying health condition, you don't have to work. We will pay you, stay home. But just as importantly, if there's someone at home that's over 70 that you live with, someone with an underlying health condition, don't want you worried about, well, I might get sick, I'll recover, but when I bring it home, that could cause someone at home to die. So very proactive with our leave policies. We've got about 15% of our workforce out on a leave because it's safe for them to be there. And then we're doing everything we can for those who are coming to work to make sure it's as safe as possible for them. And so far, we have had, across an 8-county area, we've had 3 people test positive. It's always nerve-wracking, but no one has tested positive the last 2.5 weeks. And the people that did test positive got it from their family members, not from being on the job. When the Department of Health did their analysis, it wasn't because of what happened on the job. So again, the guiding principle, when this is over, make sure you've done everything you can to keep people safe.
That's wonderful.
And the one thing I would add too is the regular communication with board members. They understand how busy we are here, but they're also very anxious themselves. Are we doing everything we can? And keeping those lines of communication open has been critical to keep their engagement, the elected officials, the other community stakeholders, as we make changes, keep everyone involved.
Thank you. We'll come back to you in a little bit. I'm interested for you to share in a few moments about some of the calls you've been having across the community. I think those are some best practices. But I want to go to Kevin Quinn, who is CEO of MTA in Baltimore, which is a unique agency, kind of like Delaware and MBTA in Massachusetts. It's a state agency. Kevin doesn't have a board. He works for the Secretary of Transportation and for the governor, and also has a whole statewide responsibility with 100 million passengers a year. Kevin, tell us about how this has impacted you and what are some of the best practices that you've been able to come up with to help mitigate it.
Yeah, I think, so, first, when, so our Governor Hogan, essentially implemented a telework policy on the administrative side of things first. And so very, very quickly, our IT group, who's absolutely amazing, and many of you, I'm sure, have equally, amazing IT groups that set you up virtually very, very fast. I felt like we advanced 2 to 3 years into the future in 2 to 3 weeks. Just by everybody getting set up with laptops and being able to work from home, being able to do payroll remotely. Oh my gosh, I never thought our agency would be able to do something like that, but we are, right? So on the administrative side, we really had to advance into the future very quickly. On the operations side, we also had to adjust very fast. And so we did pretty quickly, one of our first things we did was rear door boarding. We have a bus fleet of about 750 buses. And our bus maintenance crew was really quite amazing in getting software fixes done so that operators at their console could open up rear doors right there from where they were sitting. We had many bus model years where that wasn't possible. And so they very quickly outfitted essentially 3 or 4 years of buses, so hundreds of buses in a matter of 3 or 4 days. And and so we now have no buses out there that don't allow rear door boarding. We've also blocked off kind of the operator area as well. Those were some of the very, very first steps that we took. We also have been really careful about social distancing in our kind of assembly rooms. We have 4 major bus divisions, and there's a lot of operators gathering in there. And so what do you do when you have kind of a constrained facility? Where do you put all these people that are showing up for work every day? And so we actually put a separate bus outside. Actually, each division now has 2 or 3 buses that we kind of call our social distancing bus. And I think other agencies have done this as well. We've done that. I think, a particular surprise to me is actually today is the first day of a major service reduction for us. For about the last few months, I guess a couple months, however long it's been, we've had our workforce really show up every single day, and we haven't cut a lot of service. We're just now starting to kind of see that absenteeism increase a bit. But up until now, our philosophy has really been keep providing service as much as we can, keep protecting your workers, and that's what we've really been committed to.
Excellent. Thank you. When we come back to you, Kevin, just remind me that I want to ask you about commuter services and what's happening there. That'll be in our second round of questions.
Yeah.
Inez, in Indianapolis, tell us about what's happening there and how you all have responded, some of the highlights.
Well, I think we're right on point with what everybody has said. We've seen our service drop about 65% in ridership during this time period. We did execute the rear door boarding, taping off the area to get drivers away as much as we possibly could from other passengers, implemented same type of restrictions on our open door or paratransit service, where we're only allowing 1 person in our minivan and then every other seat in our cutaway buses. We've gone to training our operators to help our maintenance team in detailing the fleet during midday. And so we use our extra board. So we reduced our service down to Saturday level service, which means I have 200 and something people sitting on extra board now, 100 and something every day. So in working collaboratively with the union, they agreed to allow operators to do things outside of their normal duties. So we put them through hazard training. And so they are now at the transit center at peak, off-peak, and another zone to help detail the buses. They go on, we tell the passengers to get off, we sanitize the bus, passengers are now. So it degrades service a little bit, but to your point, it gives individuals a comfort level when they see us getting on the buses and sanitizing the facilities. We did close our Carson Transit Center to individuals, our lobby area and our bathrooms. Our security just was not successful in keeping social distancing down in the lobby area and the bathrooms. So we closed it with consensus of the city. Some other things that we've done is we're doing training remotely. So today, matter of fact, we set up a closed course virtually on the computer for operators to do training. We're also catching up on our annual training using computers and such. So they can dial in now to do their drug and alcohol refresher training, ethics training, and just a number of those things that we're always struggling to pull operators off of road during revenue service. We're doing that now remotely, and I think that's been a tremendous success. We're using our paratransit open door program, as a lot of other transit systems are, to help us with delivering food services at the request of the city. And so we're now up to 5 days a week with, I think, about 15 buses now. So paratransit is staying busy, which is a good thing. And putting sanitizing stations right before you come into the door. We added that. We're working with a local company to work on getting the barriers put in because the manufacturer is now 12 weeks out. So we're now working with the manufacturer here to see if they can get it done quickly. So those are some of our major things, besides, just as everybody else said, we had to ramp up our business continuity plan to be able to get folks working within 2 days instead of 2 months. So those are some of the same things that we're working on.
Excellent. That's really good. Wade Coombs, what is happening in Canada?
Well, a lot of the same things that you're talking about, or the other panelists have been talking about. And, here up in Alberta anyways, in our province, things really started to escalate about mid-month. The Premier closed down all the public and post-secondary schools and high schools and elementary schools. And so we saw things dramatically change after that. A lot of stay-at-home messages, work from home. So I think it was about the 16th of March, then that happened. And so starting that Monday, we started to see significant drop in ridership. We monitored the service for the first part of that week and then came up with suggestions. And by the start of the next week, what we did is we just took the additional 15-minute service off we had it during peak hours and went with 30-minute all day long. And one of the benefits that came out of that was we were able to manage the physical distancing requirements because the ridership, we've seen it drop 85, 90%. So what we're seeing now is we're seeing, 5 or 6 people on the bus at any one time at maximum on our local services. And we'll see, and some of our routes going into Edmonton on the commuter service, we might see up to 15 or 16. And in those routes, we'll continue to use the double-decker buses because it allows people to social distance. We're fortunate here in Strathcona County. I've worked in 3 other systems before coming here, and the level of cleaning that was done here on a regular basis, even before this, every flu season we would start our cleaning, and we do here on a daily basis, kind of like some people call them mini interiors or detailed cleaning, where we spend about 20 minutes to half hour on each bus every day. And in the flu season, we use hospital grade cleaner to clean the buses and disinfect them. So we had already had a head start on that aspect over what a lot of other people had. But what we're doing now is if an operator sees somebody who's coughing or sneezing on the bus, they notify us. We'll pull that bus out of service and clean it. Also, the buses, a lot of them will go out in the morning, we'll bring back in the afternoon and clean them again. So we're up in the cleaning. On our specialized transit, what we started to do early on is we started to screen the calls, ask some of the questions that our provincial health authority has said, as checking them to see if they're having any symptoms, are they displaying anything, and if they are, then we would actually not take them on their trips. And what we've actually moved to is actually on specialized transit is to only provide essential services. So again, if you go in grocery store, go into the drugstore to pick up your prescriptions, or you go into a medical appointment, or you go into work, those are the only trips that we'll take them for. None of the other social trips are being allowed. And that's come a long ways. It was interesting. We, within a week to week and a half, went to the rear door boarding also. One of the things that we noticed there, because I had seen on social media with some of the other systems, how they blocked off right behind the operator so that passengers couldn't come up. Because we only have a ramp on the front of the buses, we had to keep that open for people coming in with mobility devices. But one of our staff has suggested that why don't we look at that first row of seats behind those mobility areas and block that off. And so we've done that so that, again, it protects our operator and provides that social distancing, physical distancing for them. We did start to notice some loitering in our terminals as some of especially the young kids didn't have places to hang out like they normally did, started hanging around our terminals. So we increased some of the security there using some of our relief operators because I had some ability to use them now with some of the reduced services and had them there. We've also gone to closing our terminals in the evenings. While the buses will still come, the facility's not open. We closed our customer service center to the public within a week and only took phone calls. So those are some of the things that we've done. Other than that, similar to, again, what everybody else is saying.
Yep. Thank you, Wade Coombs. So thank you for joining us today. For those of you who have come on since we've started, today is a live CEO Roundtable with 6 of North America's top public transit CEOs, and we're discussing their response to the COVID-19 crisis, and kind of like in a few minutes we'll be talking about how we get out of this and how we get back to ridership. Most transit agencies across North America have experienced at least a 50% reduction in ridership, some on the commuter services even more. Julie Timm, CEO of Richmond's transit system, tell us about what's happening there in Richmond and some of the things you've done, including, I'm interested if you want to share about what you've done when it comes to young people, minors on board the vehicle.
Yeah, that one. So a lot of what we've done is very consistent with what we've seen across the country, suspending the fares, having rear door boarding, partitioning off the front of the bus so that only people who need the accessible entry on the front of the bus can use the ramp. the increased cleanings, all of those we have absolutely put in place. We put them in place about a month ago, maybe a little bit longer, before COVID really started to ramp up in the Richmond area. And of course, that's relative compared to the large cities. We're not nearly as impacted as they are. The difference that we're finding is that where a lot of people are seeing drops in ridership of 80% and 90% or more, we've seen a very low drop in ridership comparatively. Our express routes, yes, they tanked, without a doubt. People that could telework to the state capitol are doing so. But our core routes that we just implemented 15-minute frequency on, we're still seeing ridership on those buses of 20, 30, sometimes even 40 people still on a bus. It's been very concerning for us. We're taking off all of the buses that we can off of the express routes and starting to caravan or have them deployed behind the other buses, so we'll have two buses running behind each other, and even still our ridership is high. I just this morning got our numbers, our monthly numbers for March came in, and our core routes, our local bus routes, and again, this is for the entire month of March, only saw a 6% drop. That's pretty shows how essential our service is. And it's been a struggle for us to try and find a way to keep our operators safe, keep the public safe, and still get people to the essential services they need. Now, what you mentioned before about the youth, we went very quickly in Virginia to all the schools closing for the rest of the school year. I think that's happened across the country in many places. And the day after we went free fare, we had some of our, we had a beautiful spring day, and we had a bunch of high school students who decided it would be a great time to go joyride. They jumped on the buses. They were yelling out the bus windows, "Hey, come on the bus, it's free." This is, of course, the worst time in the world for that to happen. We put out an immediate announcement, said, okay, we're going to ban kids. It's not quite what we meant. It was an exaggeration of, if you're rowdy, we have the right to have dispatcher supervisors come and take you off the bus, get you to a safe haven. It was a little controversial, but again, we had to make sure that people weren't taking trips beyond essential. Since so many of our trips were already essential, we couldn't risk an increase in ridership because it was free. So we've been battling that. We finally, I believe, stabled off at about an overall 30% drop in ridership across the system, which means our core local routes are still pretty high.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie Timm, CEO of Richmond's Transit System. I'm live Facebooking and live tweeting, and so if you see me looking down a lot, and for the guests on the show, make sure you're looking at the chat panel, as you may be getting some thoughts and questions sent to you there as well. And we'll be taking questions from those of you who are watching soon, and so be sure to go ahead, and if you want to send a question, and go ahead and do so on the Q&A, and we'll be looking for that shortly. Jeff Barnett, who is a member of CTAA, I believe, down in Charles County, Maryland, where I used to be county administrator, just texted me and said, we're down 60% on fixed route. So I want to switch to you, Scott, as head of Community Transportation Association of America, representing a lot of the mid-size and smaller systems. What are the transit systems across America that you represent, seeing, and what are some of the best practices that you are hearing about?
I think it's interesting, Paul, that, you know, from the previous speakers, there came decision points that folks need to tackle. And this balancing act of essential on one hand and how we were defining that, with the lack of availability of PPE and kind of public health, really talking to a lot of transit people saying, hey, reduce your service. I was getting a dozen calls a day from members asking questions like, hey, should I reduce my service? Or they were hoping that they would hear from their state DOT or from the FTA that they were going to give you kind of flat advice on what to do. And I found myself saying to folks, they're not. None of those are going to happen. You've got to make and balance the right decision for your community. And you've got to take into account the essential nature of services. For our fixed route operators, that was obvious, and it happened right away. And what's been shared here is exactly the decision-making that took place. For our smaller operators, it was immediately deciding essential was dialysis trips, chemotherapy trips. In the NEMT space, there's lots of trips to substance abuse treatment programs that really needed to continue to occur. How do we do those and start to ask those right questions that I think Wade and others were talking about when they mentioned, Inez, I know, talked about it with her paratransit system, being able to talk to a passenger and say, that's not essential. We're not going to be doing that. So there's been that. They also know where lots of these at-risk populations reside because they're serving them regularly. So they were able to identify very quickly who would need groceries, who would need at-home deliveries of meds and other types of things. We've even started to see some real movement with the smaller agencies into assisting with the healthcare and the treatment piece. So it's been a mixed bag like that, and millions of great ideas that are working that I think we all need to really be sure to capture when we start to emerge from this and we want to talk about the value of community and public transportation in our communities. It goes beyond, as we've always said, the ridership. And these are good points where I think we need to capture these and make sure that electeds and other people understand them.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott Bogren, Executive Director of CTAA. We're getting a bunch of questions in now, so I'm going to enter a little bit of Q&A. And the first question is an amalgam of some questions, as well as one I wanted to ask you all, which is the great news is, in my opinion, the federal government recently stepped up and as part of their $2 trillion stimulus package, also decided to give the public transit industry $25 billion here in the United States. Sorry, Wade, hopefully your money's coming up there in Canada. And I've been working, as you know, with CUDA on some of that with Marco there. But here in the U.S., that was a great blessing. And I know, Scott, your organization worked hand in glove with APTA and our good friend Paul Scatellis, the CEO there, and their lobbying team to help get that in place. So the way the formula works for a lot of people who maybe aren't aware of it is that basically the federal government gives funds every year to public transit agencies through formulas. 5307, 5311 are just the names in the law that large systems and smaller systems use. And there was about, I think, $23 billion for the larger systems, Scott, is that right? And then $2 billion for the rural areas. Yep. And but it's a reimbursement formula. So it's not like they're putting money into your, gas into your tank per se. It's you have to spend the money and then they'll reimburse you like they normally do. So I'd like to ask some of the CEOs and maybe Scott as well, how are you all planning to use that money? Obviously, fare revenues are down, cleaning costs are up. Are there any other unique, so it's going to help fill that bucket, right? What other kind of things are you using the money for? And Scott Nickerson wants to know, what do you want most from your CFO, controller, and budget teams right now? Kind of a related question. Who'd like to answer that?
I can go first.
Right,
this
go ahead,
is Inez. So what I've asked the CFO and the finance department to do is start looking at projecting and forecasting. The way our revenue works, the income tax money that we're getting this year are from numbers from 2018. So although COVID is in 2020, it won't affect some of our financials. It'll affect us for the next 3 years. So we have to begin forecasting instead of a 2-year budget. Now we have to go to a 3 and potentially a 4-year projection budget because we have to set aside money now to protect our revenue stream in 2022. So to give you an example, we get about $4.5 million a month from what we already know from the 2018 numbers. So we're already anticipating that we're going to be about 15 million down in 2022. So it is looking at those kind of scenarios and putting aside any reimbursements that we can get into a specific reserve account that we're going to code and be able to show how we're drawing down off of those funds. The only other unique opportunity that we see is to be able to buy the barriers that we've been wanting for the buses for some time now. And we see an opportunity to spend about $1.2 million on getting those in. I think the biggest thing is a separate reserve account forecasting right now to ensure that we're drawing down. We believe that we'll lose about our fare revenues about $9.5 million a year And based on the projection, we're losing about 6 million right now. So, you know, and we're looking at what ridership is going to do in the next couple of years. So those are some of our things.
Interesting. Julie, could I ask you to comment on that, and then also maybe comment on how the state of Virginia stepped up and helped you all right at the beginning of the crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a lot more dependent upon our local economy to provide our funding. About 50% of our local budget every year comes from our local partners. They're suffering pretty badly with the down economy, and I know that each of them are looking to reassess their budgets. Their fiscal year start in July 1, so as they're looking to amend their budgets for next year, I'm watching those closely to see whether or not they're going to level fund us or decrease our funding. We'd already looked to see a possible decrease in local funding before this all happened because, hey, we were in the process to get dedicated regional funding, very exciting. That's, of course, also tied to a lot of the taxation, so there's less money there. The money that we'll get from the CARES Act will help us to replace the lost income from the fare box. We receive about $6 million to $9 million in fare box revenue. We're hoping that the money we get from the CARES Act will allow us to sustain a zero fare scenario, not just through the COVID, but also through any kind of economic recession or depression that might come out of it. As I already mentioned, so many of our riders are transit dependent, making essential trips. A lot of them are impacted by this and don't have the income or the reserves to come out of them themselves. So the longer we can go zero fare, the more we can support the return of our economy back to the pre-conditions. The one thing we were blessed with was that the state of Virginia, Department of Rail and Public Transportation, they provided very early on a stimulus or relief funding for us that allowed us to very quickly go to zero fare. And that was on March 18th. I believe I got the information from them on March 18th, and by close of business that day, we went zero fare. And that got us through the first 2 months of zero fare. CARES Act will get us through the next period.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to comment on any of the financial situation, how the money might help, what you're going to spend it on? Or a kind of a corollary question would be, are you stopping anything that you were planning to do because money is down? You know, is there a capital project that you decided to wait on or something like that? Bill, you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I just really appreciate the way the FTA has put this money out, and as I understand it, you can pull that money down for ongoing operations. So I want to move it from Washington to Rochester as quickly as we can. And I think we can do that in the next 3 or 4 months, get it from their bank account to our bank account so that we're able to make more nimble decisions as opposed to waiting 2 or 3 months just using it for specific purposes. I want to use it to buy diesel fuel, pay our operators and mechanics, again, get it into our bank account as quickly as possible. What I've asked our CFO, go back to the other question you asked, Paul, I've asked our CFO, I need several scenarios of zero fare for a long period of time, zero fare for a shorter period of time. That's what I need. You know, the CARES Act is going to take care of the immediate cash problem. We're not going to have to worry about making payroll in 6 weeks because we'll have federal reimbursement for those expenses. But how long after that will it last? And so keeping track of the added costs, which we've got our staff doing, keeping track of the lost fare revenue from the financial staff, but doing that scenario planning. And then to your question about capital projects, we actually broke ground 2 weeks ago on a project where when we went out to bid, we had to add $1 million to the project. It's a design build, which I'm very fortunate we went that structure rather than a design bid build. But when the bids came in, we had to put the budget up $1 million. And I talked to our construction manager, and they're expecting it's essential construction in New York State. There's not a lot of other work being done. We're going to get done faster at a lower cost. So to have something on the street right now, it's a $12 or $13 million project. We're very fortunate, and our customers and community will benefit.
Excellent. Yes, go ahead, Scott.
I think we're urging all of our members, I like the phrase Inez used, reserves. Try to better understand the long-term ramifications of what we're all dealing with now. Yes, whether you're 53, whether you're rural or urban, you can spend this 100% federal money on anything that you typically have spent on, but that doesn't mean you should. And we just need to know more, and we're in the middle of it right now. The other thing I think that has been kind of lost in the shuffle is right at the outset, FTA announced that all traditional 5307 funds now could be used for operating at an 80-20 match, which for big urbans, they never had that ability. So how do you use the FY20 funds? How do you then, reserve and move back to what you've got? What are we looking at APTA and CTAA when we're talking about FY22 approach and FY21 approach? And how difficult is that going to be, given that they just found $2.2 trillion in the cushions of the sofa, so to speak? So there's a lot of issues, and I think time will shake a lot of it out, but prudent, reserves, I think that is absolutely the way for systems here listening today to look at what's happening.
How will they do that, Scott? If you're like Bill is saying, I want to get the money from Washington into my account as soon as possible. I don't think there's any threat that the money can be taken back necessarily. But I've heard people say that if the money isn't spent over a period of time, Congress could decide to reallocate it. So how can you get the money into your account and yet still have some reserves? Are you reserving your own dollars on the side, is what you're suggesting?
The urban systems are going to get their allocations.
Right.
The rurals are going to have to work with the state DOTs. I've been hearing from state DOTs they're going to draw down 30 or 40%, even as much as 50% up front, and then based on last year's allocations, allocate that out. So I do think Bill's spot on. There's going to be the ability to do that. The other issue that you raised is one that we're all trying to figure out in this process. All of this is unprecedented, and there's nothing to draw upon. I've been working in DC for 30 years. Trust me, there's never been a $2.2 trillion emergency. A lot of us remember what we dealt with when we were dealing with the ARA and the stimulus. And I was talking to somebody who was really involved in that. And I said, remind me, how much money totally were we talking about with the stimulus of 2010 and 11? It was $800 million compared to what we're dealing with now.
$5 billion.
The other thing that you mentioned that people should recognize, the money is there until it is expended. There's no 3-year deadline or 4-year deadline, so you can play this out a while.
That's good. Good feedback. Thank you for that. Kevin, Quinn from MTA, could you, I wanted to get back to you on a question which was about a little bit more on the service, but also kind of leads us into some recovery questions. And then Wade, if you're comfortable, I may ask you a question about funding in Canada. So think on that for a minute. That's next. But Kevin, what's going on with commuter services? I mean, I saw numbers the other day out of Long Island Railroad where they were down 90%. And then I heard from you maybe even more than that on some commuter services. So tell us what's happening on that with those riders.
Sure. So I'd say we have kind of 3 levels of that kind of long haul commuter service. One, I think Julie noted express buses. So we have a similar setup with, the outside suburbs kind of coming into Baltimore. And so a couple weeks ago, we went ahead and suspended those routes. We had seen about a 80 to 90% decrease on that. Just not a lot of people going, and those are folks who can a lot of times work from home. Our other 2 big ones is our MARC commuter rail service. So we have MARC commuter rail on the Northeast Corridor, Amtrak owned, as well as the Brunswick and the Camden lines that are owned by CSX. And so we've seen tremendous ridership decreases. Yesterday was at 3% of our normal ridership on
3%.
3%, yeah, down 97, right? So we had a couple weeks ago put in place a reduced service level that basically cut service in half on the commuter line when we go to a reduced schedule. And then just yesterday, actually, we dropped it another 25%. We cut a few more out of there. And then on commuter bus, I'd say very similar numbers. Our commuter bus system in Maryland, we have a very heavy commuter bus system coming out of Southern Maryland going into DC, from north of Baltimore down into Baltimore, from Columbia down into DC, Columbia into Baltimore. And so we're seeing that at 7% of what it usually is.
7.
So
Wow.
those commuter services are down tremendously for sure. And I'll also just note that that's in being so close to Washington D.C., that's very heavily driven by a federal workforce that is mostly telecommuting at this point.
Right. Yeah, we'll talk about telecommuting. Maybe you, especially Kevin, can think about that, and some of those who have larger agencies is, are you going to make any changes? That'll be a question I'm going to ask in a minute. Are you going to let people, like I work for a technology company, right? So we have, let's say, 100 programmers sitting in an office all day programming. Well, they're home programming now, right? And so the thought is, hey, can some of them continue to do that? Maybe they could go 2 or 3 days a week and just come in for, the big group meetings or whatever. And will that help businesses reduce the amount of office space they have to rent going forward? I think that's, and then back to you, Kevin, how do you think that's going to impact commuter ridership? I mean, have you done any projections? I mean, I think it's going to be a lagging indicator, commuter services are, versus regular public bus service. When the jobs open back up, I think our transit services will go back to closer to normal levels. But I'm concerned about commuter service taking a lot longer as people are realizing, hey, I can, even if their business doesn't change, they can talk to their boss and say, to get a little work-life balance here, instead of riding the train down an hour and 15 minutes into DC and then taking an Uber to my office, and this whole thing takes an hour and a half, 3 hours a day out of my life. Can I work from home 2 days a week? I just showed you for the last 3 months I did it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we haven't done any kind of projections or anything like that quite yet, but I think you're right on. I mean, I think, there are those companies that already had teleworking policies in place. And I think for many of them, that employee that was teleworking 1 or maybe 2 days a week, shifting to 5, that wasn't a huge shift for them. There's a lot of other companies and government agencies that weren't doing that at all. And to your point, this is, I think, showing some folks that, it can be done, that technology is out there. I think managers are learning how to manage more remotely now. There's a lot of policies in place of how do you do telework the right way. It's not just people working from home. What are the tasks? How are managers checking in regularly? How do you keep in touch with your staff on a regular basis? And so to your point, I think businesses and companies and agencies sort of learning how to be in this new world is going to have those downstream effects on ridership potentially. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on
Paul,
that?
Paul, I want to go back to something Scott had said, and just speak to the industry out there. I like what Inez said about a reserve account. I like what Scott said about don't spend it all at one time. But the next time the federal government is looking at transit, I want that money to be gone. I don't want them to give us $25 billion in 3 months from now, 6 months from now. They go, geez, 10 billion of it is still here. It must not have been as needed as we thought. And so the quicker we can draw it down, and again, don't spend it all.
Right.
But going back to your question to Kevin, I'm not a sociologist. My dad died last November at 96. I wanted to talk to him. At the end of World War II, when that trauma was over, people moved out to the suburbs and got their own property. It was almost like safety was the big thing. Start your family. And when I'm talking to friends right now, I'm finding a 5-minute conversation is taking 15, 20 minutes. I've got a brother that to get past 3 minutes on the phone is a miracle. We talked for 35 minutes. It wouldn't surprise me to see a shift into the city for people to be around one another after being isolated for so long. I think there's going to be those kinds of changes. If this lasts 6 or 12 months, there'll be changes to how quickly people want to get crowded onto a bus. But I think there'll be other changes of, do we want to be around one another, or do we want to be away from one another? How's that anxiety and trauma? What impact does that have? And it will be more than just public transit. There will be lifestyle changes as a result of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Thank you for that. That's insightful. Bill, aren't you chairman of something like a group of bus? What are you head of?
It's called the Bus Coalition, and we partner very closely with Scott and CTAA, trying to improve the 5339 program. I'm on the board at APTA, president of the Bus Coalition, and a member of CTAA. I probably should join the Canadian organization as well. Big fan of transit.
There you go. Well, speaking of Canada, thank you for that good segue. Let's go to Wade Coombs and tell us what is happening. So I was interviewing Marco D'Angelo, the CEO of CUDA, for my daily podcast, Comfort's Corner, about 3 weeks ago. And he said, Paul, later today, we're going to submit our request for X amount of dollars. He walked me through what it was. But are they still fighting about that up there? What's going on, man?
Good question. I'm sitting here envious of your my American counterparts down there and all the money you have. Definitely a different system up here, and our funding is different. Like I've worked in 4 systems now, and each one of them it's the norm up here. Totally funded by the municipality. We don't have options to get sales tax and gas tax to operate our systems. While we've achieved some really good results on a federal level for capital infrastructure spending, we've seen the most amount of money ever given towards public transit, but we didn't get any operating. In this current environment, the federal government's been very focused on helping individuals who have been laid off and finding themselves unemployed, small businesses and they have not done anything for public transit or municipalities. Again, we're part of a municipality, so our budget is part of the municipal budget. If there's problems within the municipality, then it affects us. I know with our municipality, as many of them are up here, are looking to have deferring taxes for residents and small businesses and other businesses to help them get through this problem. So that will impact the municipal budget, which then impacts us. But on the federal level, and what Marco and the team at CUDA are doing, they did submit a letter on March 30th to the federal government. They were asking for $40 million per month in funding to help replace what's being lost in the fare boxes across the country. I just read a report before this that TransLink, which is one of the largest systems in Canada, it's in Vancouver, they're losing $2.5 million a day. And so they have to find that lost revenue. They're looking at service cuts now because of that. Now, TransLink is a unique one in BC because they are a provincial entity and get funding from the province. So they're unique in BC than the rest of the provinces. But the other thing that Marco and the team are doing is we need that funding now. We need some money to help us now in covering that cost. An example is the federal government has passed some funding. They'll pay up to 75% of people's wages if small businesses and large businesses will keep their employees on the payroll. But that's not an option for us. We're not getting that. But again, one of the other things they're looking at is, again, what do we get immediately to help us? But also as we talk about come out of this. So we're looking at the recovery for the economies, and the governments are talking about stimulus packages. So how can we make sure that some of the stimulus packages include public transit projects, whether it's building new terminals, parking rides, garages, whatever it is? How do we make sure that we're part of that in a way that helps to take public transit in Canada to the next level and make sure we're getting what we need while helping the economy? Here in Alberta, the province that I'm situated in, we're hit with a double whammy. We are very dependent on fuel. We have the oil sands here. We have a lot of gas industry. And so with the reduction in usage because of the pandemic, plus the gas war that was going on, this province has been hit twice. So we've been having conversations with the province here also about how they can help us out and how they can help municipalities through and public transit. And we had estimated at one point, you look at it on a monthly basis, $21 million in revenue collected by the transit systems in our province. We're losing that, and that's impacting all of our systems and our municipalities. So it's a conversation. We're definitely behind where you guys are down in the States. We're having a conversation. We've built good relationships with our federal government. We're in a minority government situation right now. So one thing CUTE has been very good at is they've built relationships with all parties. So we've got some leverage there to help in this minority government, some that are maybe more friendly towards transit, to help bring that case forward. But Marco and his team are working very hard at bringing that to the federal government's forefront and making sure that they look at us and don't forget us.
That's great. Thank you. Aren't you the head of some group up there too in your region?
I chair, CUTA breaks into regional chapters, and I chair one, which is the Prairie Provinces and Territories. So basically, if you go from the edge of Minnesota to the edge of Washington State, and that's the area I cover, 3 provinces, 2 territories, and I go as far north as you can get with the territories. And we have been doing a lot as an organization and as a chapter. We do a weekly update as to what's changed, what are you doing now. We send out emails. We had one of our systems contact us and ask us about wheelchair securement and what are we doing and how are we managing that, and how are we addressing operators' concerns. So what we do is we send out the email to all of our members and get feedback, and then we share it with each other as to what's going on.
That's great. If you just joined us, we are doing a live CEO roundtable with 6 of the top public transit CEOs across North America. If you joined late and you weren't able to hear it all, we'll post this as a regular Transit Unplugged podcast coming up soon, so you can hear the whole thing. And those of you who are on it can share it with your friends and associates that way as well. We're also doing, I just want to let people know, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, since this COVID-19 crisis has occurred, I've started up a special podcast under the Transit Unplugged logo, which is called Comfort's Corner. And in it, we do headline news. We also do a newsmaker interview and then a reading from our book, The Future of Public Transportation. This week, yesterday, we had Jeff Arndt on from, he's the CEO of the transit system called VIA down in San Antonio, Texas. And then tomorrow I'll have Roger on, Roger Morton, my good buddy from Oahu, who runs the transit system in Honolulu. And then on Friday, our guest will be Aaron Pinkerton, who is CEO of BC Transit in the western part of Canada. Also, I'm excited that a little bit later today, I'll be interviewing Phil Washington, CEO of LA Metro, a good buddy of mine who heads up America's second largest transit system. And he'll be talking about some of the recovery efforts and how they're moving forward. That'll all be on Transit Unplugged. So make sure if you're not listening that you go to transitunplugged.com and sign up, and we'll send you an email just one time every 2 weeks and remind you the show is live. That's all you get. We don't hammer you. Have you noticed that since this thing started, every business I've ever been in contact with has sent me an email to tell me, here's how we're dealing with COVID-19. I never knew I needed so much
How we can help.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, speaking of that, I was wondering, how are we using this time? I've asked several people this, and I wanted to throw this out there just as a general question to everyone. Are you using this downtime as a way to get ahead on capital projects? I know some people have been covering it as headline news, so some people were doing construction on tracks. Well, now you can single track because there's hardly anybody riding the train, so it's a good time to work on that, et cetera. Are you moving ahead on this construction project you had going on? How are we using this time? Anybody?
Oh, I started laughing immediately when you said, how are we using this downtime? This doesn't feel like downtime. It's a fire every day, and it's been a challenge to keep up with.
Yeah, downtime and ridership. That's what I meant. And some people are cutting service accordingly. So how are we using this time when there's less people riding? Are we doing anything productive as an example for others?
I think for me, Paul, go ahead, Kevin.
Kevin, go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. I'll just say, so on our light rail system, we are doing some work that we've accelerated up. Not a ton of work, not a huge amount of work, but in the downtown, just with less trains, less traffic out there, we are able to get that work done. We also have the Purple Line under construction, our 16-mile long light rail line outside of Washington, D.C., going from New Carrollton, to Bethesda. And some of that work is we were able to accelerate near schools. With the schools closed and that school traffic gone, we were able to do some work close to schools with that. So a couple things we've been able to accelerate. Yeah,
that's great. Inez, how about IndyGo?
I think we had some grandiose ideas. We had a good plan, a strategic plan on all the campaigns we were going to do. And then 80% of my maintenance team decided to go out on FMLA. So the stimulus package helped in one way, and then the government rule hurt us in another way. You know, there weren't enough safeguards in the program that said if it's a 2-family member household, you know, only one member can be out for a period of time. It just opened the door. And so now I have 161 people as of today who are out on extended leave. 161. So the things that we had planned to do for us have now been put on the back burner. And so it has really caused a delay in some projects because we don't simply have the workforce. To have, you know, 100 and something extra operators per day, to put it in a perspective, I'm now struggling to put service on the street at a reduced rate because people are calling off.
Wow.
So it is causing a ripple effect because we weren't involved in understanding how this extended leave could affect how we do our business. I mean, I appreciate the money and all of that stuff, but they should have gotten a little bit more feedback from us on how the impact was going to be for transit.
That's interesting.
Here in Richmond, really part of it is not so much how much we're advancing some of the capital projects. Some of those are going to be put on hold. A lot of what we're looking to advance are the social policies around our infrastructure and how we're doing our spending and how we're making our priorities. When we look at our dedicated lanes for BRT, some of the areas where we would like to have more dedicated lanes, we didn't have them because the policy was to have on-street parking. Now that the people aren't using their on-street parking, is this a good time to start making some of those changes to our infrastructure and how it's used, how we deal with the fare policy and the equity of it, and advancing some of those conversations that may have been more of a challenge to advance 3 months ago. So our capital infrastructure, maybe not as much, but our social conversation, really accelerating that.
Anyone else got any thoughts on that topic?
So I'll take it a little bit different tack, Paul, and I agree with Inez on the number of employees that are out on leave right now, keeping their families safe, keeping the employees safe, and it certainly has an impact on what we do. Our paratransit service is down 80%. Like I've heard, I think Wade and Kevin talk about dialysis, medical appointments, those very specific essential trips. But to keep the operators and the equipment busy, I'm on a regular call with community leaders, the United Way, the county executive, the mayor, the local congressman, and listening to where food needs to be distributed, hand sanitizer. We've got, and I think others have this happening, a distillery that stopped making whiskey. They're making hand sanitizer, but they don't have a distribution network. So it's getting sent to a central location, and then it's our paratransit vehicles that's distributing it to the community-based organizations. We worked with the pediatric care for our community. So we've got mothers of very young infants up to 2 years of age. Many would use the bus to get to a well visit for their vaccines, for their measles shots, et cetera. And the pediatric care folks were very concerned if they do not get these vaccinations, we're going to have another outbreak in 6 or 12 months amongst infants. And so they've identified about 600 appointments that we'll be using our paratransit vehicles to do curb-to-curb service for these mothers of young children. So there's a lot of needs in the community. It requires, as I hear these leaders, being plugged into your local community and then having a flexible workforce to make the community better off during these times.
That's great. One interesting approach that I heard yesterday from Jeff Arndt in San Antonio is that he is driving his unused paratransit vehicles because they have Wi-Fi on them into public housing projects where they may not have enough internet for students who are trying to do their schoolwork online. And it puts out a signal maybe 200 feet from the vehicle. And they can pull one into a community, and a bunch of homes and apartments can pick up the Wi-Fi signal for their children to do their schoolwork. I thought that was another kind of unique and interesting approach. I wanted to ask, we have about 15, 20 minutes left, and before we kind of get into the recovery mode, and I'm going to ask all of you about ideas you have, and I'm going to share some best practices that I'm hearing start to sprinkle up. But this whole concept of people being able to work from home, is that going to impact your workforce? Are you thinking about making any changes? Maybe you don't want to talk about it now online, but I'm just interested if anybody can talk about it. Do you see that impacting your direct workforce? I know that 60% or 70% of our workforce is frontline troops, right? They're the ones that are maintaining the vehicles and driving the vehicles and fueling them, and the road supervisors and the police officers and all that. But there is a large back office function in a lot of transit agencies, right? HR, finance, IT, procurement, legal, PR, all these groups. Is anyone thinking about how this might impact long-term, or you allow people to do a little bit more work from home?
This is Inez. We're already starting to have that conversation with our executive team. They've already been asked to begin to analyze the productivity level of their employees. And I'm seeing higher numbers with some of our procurement folks. Where, because we've instituted some more efficient best practices on, simple things like DocuSign. I got there and I was like, how come we're not using DocuSign? And then it's like, oh, we've had it for 4 years. We've never used it. They're like, so let's start using it. And then all of a sudden, now we're all using DocuSign. So each one is being asked to poll, analyze, and then we're going to work on a remote work from home policy that's beyond this pandemic situation. Because, there is a factor of work-life balance, but things that I've told them is like the whole payroll department can't be out on Friday. Everybody just cannot show up in that department. There has to be some staggered and things of that nature. And then we found that some employees just aren't good at it. And to be able to have that honest conversation about it. But yeah, we do see that there's going to have to be some changes in order to continue moving forward.
Any other comments on that? Anyone wants to share?
Well, Paul, being at CTAA, we're 2 blocks from the White House. So from a terrorism and a lot of other issues, we've had a business continuity plan for a long time that we went right into, always being prepared that we may have to work away from the office for a duration. And it's easier with what we're doing than what my colleagues here on the panel are doing. Personally, I don't like it. I like being in the office. My colleagues would tell you that I'm the one person who never uses telework. I like to be around people and know what's going on, and I think ideas and things. So as with everything else, it's a balance. And I think a lot of systems are going to move to this as they should. A lot of businesses are going to move to this. And it really leads to how well we understand travel shed changes and commuting pattern changes within our communities is going to be so central to how we restart our services and what they look like pre and post pandemic.
How do we restart it, Scott? Do you have any ideas, or are you hearing things from your folks about? We're about at the peak, I think people are saying, around now, somewhere in the next week or two or now. And then, so what's the game plan to get riders back on the bus?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points of demarcation we need to keep in mind. There's the back end of the so-called wave we've talked about, which let's all hope we're going to get there soon. That's not the time to just immediately jump and open everything back up again, I don't believe. Then there's the period after there's a vaccine. And I think that's a key moment to keep in mind. People are going to feel a lot more comfortable about getting on a packed bus in Richmond if they know there's a vaccine that most people have and have had access to, rather than, well, the vaccine's not out yet and we're looking at what's happening in China. And those are different periods. We're going to do a lot of training with our members on not just restarting what you had prior to the pandemic, but giving some critical thought to what you were actually seeing in your community pre and post. So many times I've worked with systems over the 30 years, and we've kind of asked, and it's been a standard question, I would ask a manager of an operation, like, does the service look like the way it would if you could start it from scratch? Mm. And it's always been this theoretical question, because no one would ever start anything from scratch. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, Kevin's at 5% on the mark line. He will be basically restarting from scratch. And there's a lot of systems that have routes and services that they know are relatively unproductive. Maybe politicians have forced them to serve these areas, or maybe there's been well, that's because we've always served that area that way. I know Bill's gone through a redesign. One of you had to have one just postponed. A lot of that thinking needs to be brought forward, and we ought not to just restart everything, but we need to use this as an opportunity, I guess. And we're going to do some training at our expo in Louisville in November that got switched to November. We're going to be next May in Richmond, and we'll want to continue those discussions, because I do think it's a chance, and it's an important one not to miss.
Kevin, what do you think? He mentioned you. What are your thoughts about, kind of what everything he said, or any of your own thoughts on that topic?
Yeah. So we're in the process of putting that kind of game plan together right now. I mean, it's a great point, Scott, that that's got to be thought through really, really carefully, right? Yeah. And it's got to be phased in. And so, for our standpoint, those commuter services got to start from scratch. I've got to ramp back up those rail contractors, those commuter bus contractors. And so, what is their ability to ramp up, right? So that's kind of this contracted service side of things. And then for our own really unionized employees, on the bus side of things, on light rail and our metro system, how do we ramp that up? How do we shift? And in a way, on our light rail and metro, I think it'll be relatively easy to kind of kick that back up from a reduced schedule to a full schedule again. But the bus side of things, a lot of that's driven by attendance. And I think that's going to be kind of continually taking the temperature of the public as well as our workforce, of seeing where we are from a public health standpoint, and where are we with positive cases, just citywide, statewide. I think there's a lot that's got to go into that. And then the training piece that was noted, I think, is also going to be so key, because it's a new world, it's a new environment that we're living in. We've all learned a lot, and someone has to stop and do a post-mortem here. Has to do a debrief on what we've all kind of gone through, and what have we learned, and if there's another wave, how do we say, okay, let's gear it back up, but we've got to be ready in case there's another wave. How do you ramp back up but ensure that you're well positioned to go back down again if another wave hits? It's how do you create yourself? How do you create the foundation for a more nimble agency through this process?
Those are great questions. Anybody else want to comment on that?
This is Inez. One of the things that we're working on, it's just exactly what everybody else was talking to, is working with our chamber, our local chamber. They're really dialed into some of the major employers in our area. And so we're working with them to start having that conversation with those employers to see what they plan to do when it comes to telemarketing. So it will help us form our decision on what IndyGo will or might look like as we begin to ramp back up. It's all about realigning the service or right sizing it. But we don't know how to right size it if we don't know what other people are even thinking. Just as we're having the discussion about telecommuting, teleworking, what are they starting to think about? Our downtown is driven by, all of that ridership. And if, we're getting ready to build a purple line, which is a $155 million project, is the feds, are they going to have concerns that, that investment isn't the best investment for them anymore? because the ridership isn't going to be there. So we feel we've got some work to do to prove to the FTA and that it is still a wise investment in IndyGo. And then that'll help us form our decision as well on when we do the next redesign, and if the redesign has to be the same of what we originally thought it was supposed to be, or does it need to be changed again?
That's a really good point. I'll be on a webinar with the Crow CFO Consortium. This is a big firm that does a lot of work with transit agencies across the country called Crow. And they have a chief financial officer organization. Bill, you probably know about it, having been one. And I'm going to be a guest on their program. And Scott Nickerson from that group has been on this call listening. But I know that a lot of financial folks are analyzing just what you talked about, Inez, as some of these plans we had in place for these big capital projects that were based on, certain ridership projections. How's that all going to balance out now? Any other thoughts in general on that topic? Yeah. Julie, any thoughts on it? Anybody else?
Well, I think that
Go ahead, Julie.
Thank you. I definitely think that for us, a lot of when we start looking at the system is really reconsidering if we can maintain the higher frequency on these core capacity routes. Some of them we knew that we needed that 15-minute frequency. Now that we're caravanning or convoying the buses, we'll have higher frequency. And in this time of social distancing, hopefully it'll help spread people among more buses. But when that changes, I really think that what we'll see is, because those are core routes and because that's the core of our system, they're going to start filling up. And so do we then have to take those buses out to redeploy them on express routes? Or will the community come back and really have more telecommuting so we can keep those resources on those core routes? It's going to be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah. I wanted to give you some information I received today from a colleague of mine over the pond, as they say, in Great Britain, who's been tracking the Wuhan transit system where the outbreak, kind of started from in Wuhan, China. And as of 3 weeks ago, I was talking with David Zipper this week, who's a colleague of mine who's a great thought leader in the industry, a Harvard visiting fellow. And at the end of March, they were at like 65%. Wuhan was back. But as of yesterday, we're tracking their actual ridership data that they have online called Asia RTI passenger data. They're up to 80% of ridership. And this is about a month post-pandemic for them on their regular systems. And they are requiring all passengers to still wear a mask. And they're also requiring them to scan their QR code when boarding using their smart cell as part of a government initiative to monitor where people are moving and kind of tracking all that. That's one of the controversial aspects of what may be coming is, we all saw in the news this last week that Apple and Google are going to have things on our phone where we can see if we've been in contact with someone, et cetera. So there's some best practices that are coming out where people are maybe putting on their overhead sign on their bus. This bus was cleaned at 2 p.m. today, Tuesday, the 14th. And so people can see, oh, okay, that bus just got cleaned. I feel a little safer. Other folks are going to continue their new high levels of vehicle and station cleaning with medical grade disinfectants to continue that, and not just once a night have the buses swept out and some general wipe down, but actually this higher level, maybe multiple times a day. Other folks are moving toward mobile ticketing to reduce the need to touch cash or paper or vending machine or ticket vending machines. Other folks are talking about deploying ultraviolet lights that have showed promise in killing the coronavirus. Some folks are in collaboration with city officials and celebrities to amplify the message that transit is safe and back in business. We've had so many politicians telling people, and I'm a recovering one, telling people, stay off the bus. It's only for essential workers. We're going to need that message changed in a little bit to say, okay, no, now we want you to come back. And so, and we need to make sure that the message isn't, that transit's a big petri dish where germs are spread. And that's kind of the message, unfortunately, that's been given by folks, by some folks out there. And I think irresponsibly personally, but that's just my personal opinion. I think that if we can keep stores safe and we can keep other places safe where people can ride, we certainly can keep the vehicles safe. People like Julie and others have done the social distancing on the vehicle where they're only allowing one person per row. And a lot of agencies have gone to 50% vehicle capacity. And so there are ways to maintain our cleanliness. And we're going to have to kind of message that out. And one other tidbit, and then I'm interested in your feedback on this in the last couple minutes, is Many agencies are thinking about continuing to offer free trips for a little while longer, both as a way to say thank you for drivers for staying home and as a way to help kickstart ridership. So any thoughts on those or any other mechanisms that you think in the last couple minutes here could be effective in helping to have the industry recover?
Yeah, I want to repeat what Scott, when we opened this section, he talked about the different peaks that we're going to have. In New York State, they're talking about reopening. I was shocked to find out New York City people would stay home. You know, I understand in Wuhan, China, with their QR codes, the police will come if you don't stay home. But we're Americans. We're New Yorkers. We do what we want to do. We have been told to do what we have to do to stay safe. And it's a level of obedience, a level of submission that I didn't know that we had. And that kind of mental change, as I said earlier, it's going to have long-term impact. I know we're talking about, ramping up, but I think we can have this conversation again 6 or 12 months from now, because until I know I can be safe, watching the Masters on Sunday, Tiger Woods winning it 2 years in a row on CBS, because of the replay this year. But who's going to stand shoulder to shoulder like that for 5 hours? I'm watching the crowds. Who's going to do that right now?
Right.
How long is that going to take? And it's going to take a lot of things to go back to a restaurant where everyone's seated together, to go to a ball game, to go to an NFL football game. Are you going to have that tailgate party with those same friends? There's a lot that's going to happen. Transit is going to be part of it. I think one thing I've learned is just how essential we are to the communities that we serve. And I think there'll be more investment because we were the way people got around at these times.
That's a perfect way to wrap it up, I think, Bill. I want to thank Bill Carpenter, who is CEO of RTS in Rochester, Julie Timm, CEO of Greater Richmond Transit, GRTC in Richmond, Kevin Quinn, CEO of MTA Maryland, Wade Coombs, head of Strathcona County Transit, Scott Bogren, Executive Director of CTAA, and Inez Evans, CEO of IndyGo, for this really interesting look at what's happening inside the transit industry, how we're responding to the COVID-19 crisis, and perhaps a way out, and a good sober reflection from Bill at the end that we don't want to do things too quickly. But I think, once again, transit will be a leader in the community. And I'm excited and enthused about the fact that, at least here in the U.S., perhaps we've crossed the Rubicon when it comes to the federal government and their investment and involvement in public transit. Like Europe and Australia and some other countries that have had heavy federal involvement and investment in transit, America hasn't really been there for a long time. We've had our investment in highways and in other transportation modes, but never really a lot in public transit the way I think it should be. And now, as you said, Bill, this is the message for all of our political leaders and the funding agencies, is that we don't just make the wheels in the bus go round and round. We make the wheels of our economy turn round and round. And the essential workers that make our society and our economy run are the folks that are using public transit. And so we need to make sure that that investment, if there's another round of stimulus or another round of some kind of capital investment where we go to, infrastructure week again in Washington, we need to make sure that transit and our public transit facilities and capital projects are well funded. That's, Napoleon understood it, that the only way to get big capital projects done is for federal involvement back there, 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It's the same rule today. The national government really needs to be involved in helping to fund public transit if it's going to be continue its role in helping our society work. Scott, do you give me a big amen on that?
Absolutely. We'll keep fighting.
So I'll tell you what we got coming up next. We had 6 awesome CEOs on today. We'll have some more on for the next 2 weeks. So today is the 14th. We did our CEO Roundtable. Next week on Tuesday, April 21st at 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern, just like this one was, we'll have an executive roundtable preparing for beyond COVID-19, business as usual. Lawrence Skyver and Peter Stark. Lawrence, head of Sunline Transit, one of my good friends in the industry who's led the zero emission bus hydrogen especially message for the country, and Peter Stark, GM of Whatcom Transportation Authority, plus some other CEOs will be joining us that day. And then the following week, on Tuesday, April 21st at 2 p.m., James McDonald, Director of Saskatoon Transit, will join a number of high-tech leaders who will talk about using technology in order to help our transit systems move forward. Once again, thank you to all of you who joined us today, and thank you for our special guests on this CEO Roundtable. Thanks for being with us.